They laughed when they saw her. For men circled her like buzzards around something half dead and twitching, drunk on dust and whiskey, tugging her by the wrists to show off her bulk. Their laughter wasn't sharp. It was low, mean, and rhythmic, like something they'd practiced. She stood there silent, arms limp, as the sun hit her square in the face. The laughter stopped when the Lakota stepped forward. He didn't say a word at first. He just looked at her, then at the men, then back at her. She flinched, maybe expecting another round of mocking. But what came was something different. He pointed once, and then said it soft, but loud enough for every man in that dry auction yard to hear. "She's my bride. Let's go back to where it all started." The Missouri air hung thick over the trading post like a damp cloth, carrying the sharp tang of animal hides and pipe smoke. Flies buzzed over stacked salt barrels and long-dried blood at the edge of the slaughtering slab. A dog with one eye limped between wagons, looking for scraps. And just beyond the edge of the timberline, where the prairie widened into gold, a girl chopped firewood like the world owed her something. Her name was Millie, though most just called her the big one. Big shoulders, big hands, big appetite, too big to court, too big to dance with at the harvest festival. So they put her to work, cooking, hauling, washing, sweating, and silent. She didn't speak much, and when she did, her voice came out low, like an old church organ half covered in dust. She'd grown up on a mule ranch, orphaned young, raised by an uncle who never spoke of her mother and never once let her sit at the table when guests were over. He used to tell buyers Millie was part draft horse, meant it as a joke. The last time he said it, she broke the yoke clean off a plow cart. After that, he stopped calling her anything. When he died of the fever, she was sold off, quietly like livestock, by a cousin who wanted to be rid of the burden. Millie was 19 when they loaded her into the back of a freight wagon and hauled her 3 towns over to be traded off to the highest bidder, though most of the bidders were just curious drunks looking to laugh, not buy. They stuck a number on her shirt like she was a crate of apples and made her stand in the sun for hours. She didn't cry. She didn't move. She barely blinked. Her hair was long but matted, her dress 2 seasons old, frayed at the sleeves. Her boots were patched with canvas and wire. When one man joked that she looked like she could pull a plow faster than his mule, the crowd roared. She didn't flinch. Somewhere near the edge of the crowd stood a Lakota man named Wakasa. He had walked into the town alone that morning with a calm stride and a wide hat. Nobody asked where he came from. Townsfolk didn't tend to ask Lakota men anything if they came alone. He wasn't tall, but he had the kind of shoulders that stayed relaxed even when 10 men stared him down. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't barter, just watched. Watched the wagons, the auctioneers, the men slapping their knees and shouting bids. And then he saw Millie, not like the others saw her. He didn't look at her size. He didn't measure her arms or laugh at her sunburn. He just looked, and something shifted. The sky darkened just a little as the sun tucked behind a cloud. A wind moved through the dust and lifted the hem of Millie's dress ever so slightly. Her eyes flicked sideways, just enough to catch the Lakota man's gaze. Then came the sound of boots against the wooden platform. He stepped forward. A trader saw him coming and raised a brow. "You lookin' to buy or just lookin', redskin?" The man grunted, holding a rusted flask in one hand and a rolled cigarette in the other. Wakasa didn't answer. He walked up to the front of the platform, where Millie still stood, unmoving. The trader gestured wide. "Ain't nobody else put a real bid in. Hell, I'll give her to you for half a mule and a handshake." Still no reply. The crowd chuckled, expecting more silence. That's when Wakasa raised his chin, glanced once at Millie, then said, "She's my bride." The laughter stopped. The trader blinked. "You what now?" "I said she's my bride," Wakasa repeated, this time slower, clearer. "I'm not here to bid." "Boy," the trader chuckled nervously. "You can't just say that. That ain't how this works. She's up for." I said. Wakasa cut in again, quieter this time but sharper. "She's not for trade. She's my bride." And with that, he reached up to the platform and offered Millie his hand. She didn't move. The crowd had grown quieter now. Men exchanged glances. One spat in the dirt. A few looked around for the sheriff. A half-drunken voice in the back muttered something about savages talking are women now. But Millie was no one's woman. Not really. Not until that moment. She looked at the hand. It was weathered, wide, calloused like her own. But it didn't shake. She looked at the man. His eyes were dark, unreadable, but not unkind. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out and took his hand, and stepped down. A chorus of murmurs erupted. Someone cursed. Someone shouted something about filthy union. But Millie didn't look back. Wakasa didn't let go. Together, they walked straight through the crowd like ghosts. Silent, sure, steady. She was still sunburned, still in torn clothes, still covered in dust and shame. But as they passed the edge of the post, someone whispered, "Maybe he's blind." And someone else replied, "Nah, he just sees different." That night, the air in town stayed restless. Doors closed early. A horse was spooked for no reason. And somewhere near the edge of the prairie, under a quilt of stars, a fire crackled where two strangers sat. One large and silent, the other small and still. Neither of them spoke, but neither of them looked away. They made it 12 miles before the wind changed. The fire had burned low, embers pulsing in the dark like slow breaths. Millie sat with her knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped around them. Wakasa crouched beside the fire, unmoving, eyes fixed on the coals. Neither had slept. Not really. Sleep doesn't come easy when your life has flipped like a cart in a ditch. At dawn, Wakasa stood. "We go," he said. Millie didn't ask where. She just picked up the small satchel he'd handed her the night before and followed. The prairie stretched open before them like a sun-bleached sea. Grass rolled in gentle waves. Hawks circled. No paths, no signs. Just space. For the first time in her life, Millie wasn't walking in circles for someone else. By midday, they reached a grove of cottonwoods near a trickling creek. Wakasa cupped water in his hands, offered her the first sip. She hesitated, then drank. The water was cold enough to wake something in her chest she didn't know had gone to sleep. "You don't talk much," she said after a long silence. "You listen well," he replied. That was all they said for hours. The camp he brought her to wasn't much. A ring of stones, a blanket of pelts, a lean-to made from branches and canvas. It sat at the base of a low hill, shielded from wind and far from any road. No white men, no gawkers, no laughter, just stillness. That night, Millie cooked beans over the fire. Wakasa watched without interfering. When she handed him a bowl, he nodded once. Then he said, "They will come." Millie paused. "The men from the auction?" He shook his head. "Others." She swallowed hard. "Because of me?" "Because of me," he said. That was the first time she realized. She didn't know who he was. 2 days later, the sound of hooves carried across the hills. Just one rider this time. He wore a brown duster and a town badge, though it was half covered in dust. He pulled up to their camp with the careful gait of someone trying not to get shot. "Friend or law?" Wakasa asked without standing. "Both if I can be," the man said. Millie stepped out from behind the lean-to. The man tipped his hat slightly. "Name's Sheriff Langford. Don't mean to intrude, but there's been some talk." "Talk?" Wakasa asked. The sheriff's eyes flicked toward Millie, then back. "You walked off with a girl who was being auctioned without a bid. Now there's folks saying you stole her. Others saying you claimed her like property. And then there's the folks saying you married her." "I did," Wakasa said. Sheriff Langford let the silence stretch. "She your kin girl?" he asked. "No," Millie replied. "Did he force you?" "No." "Did you agree to go?" Millie looked at Wakasa, then said, "Yes." Langford scratched his jaw. "Well, I ain't about to tell a grown woman who she can marry. But I'll tell you this. 2 of the men who laughed at you that day? They didn't laugh so much when they found out whose son you were." Wakasa's mouth tensed slightly. "They're stirring up trouble," Langford continued. talking about bringing a posse, not to take her back, to make a point. Millie frowned. What kind of point? Langford looked at the fire. The kind men make when they're scared someone ain't playing by their rules anymore. Then he leaned a little closer. They say you're sitting Elk's boy. Wakasa didn't blink. I am. Millie had never heard the name, but the weight of it hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Thought he died, Langford muttered. He did. The sheriff looked around once more, at the lean-to, the fire, the woman who didn't look scared anymore, and nodded slowly. I'll stall him best I can. But trouble's coming, like a dust storm. And trouble don't ask questions. It just rolls through. Wakasa nodded. The sheriff turned his horse. Just before he left, he glanced back and added, Don't give them a reason, son. When he was gone, Millie sat down by the fire. Who was your father? A chief, Wakasa said. A warrior? A man. She waited, but he didn't say more. That night she dreamed of fire, of men with torches, laughing like they did at the auction, of ropes, of waking up to silence and finding herself alone again. In the morning, Wakasa was still there, and he handed her a carved knife. Not a weapon, a tool. She stared at it. You expect me to fight? She asked. I expect you to stay. Millie looked him in the eye. I've never been allowed to stay anywhere. You are now. The day passed without sound, but the sky turned strange in the evening. Clouds thick and heavy, hanging low like bruises. And just before night fell, Wakasa lit the fire and said, They are coming. Millie's heart thudded once, hard. Why didn't we run? Because running makes them right. She didn't understand that until much later. When you run, they say it's because you're guilty. But when you stay, when you look them in the eye, that's when the real war begins. The wind died just before dusk, and with it went the last sound of birdsong. Millie stood near the lean-to, her hands rough from firewood and stitching, the knife tucked into her belt, though she had no real idea how to use it. Her eyes scanned the horizon, but all she could see was the trembling line of tall grass bathed in gold and orange. Wakasa didn't pace. He sat, cross-legged, like the calm at the center of a storm, staring into the fire as if it might offer a map. His bow was beside him, but untouched. The quiver of arrows was neatly bound. He hadn't said a word since midday. It was Millie who broke the silence. How many? He didn't look up. For maybe 5. White men. Not soldiers. Not law. She nodded slowly, mouth dry. I should hide. No. Why not? Because you're not the reason they're coming. She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped, because somewhere inside, she knew he was right. This wasn't about her. It was about what she represented. A Lakota man stepping into a white town and walking away with something they had claimed, mocked and discarded, only to have him call it his bride. Not his property. Not his plunder. His bride. That was the threat. The sky darkened fast, quicker than normal. There was no thunder, no wind. Just a pressing stillness, like the prairie itself was holding its breath. Then hoofbeats, distant at first, then louder. Wakasa stood slowly. Millie followed him out to the edge of the grove, standing just behind his left shoulder. 5 riders. 3 wore hats tilted low, rifles across their backs. 1 had a lantern swinging from his saddle horn. The 5th had a whip coiled at his side. No badges, no pretense. Just vengeance. They pulled up 10 paces from the fire, eyes sharp. Well, well, the man with the lantern said. His voice was oily and high, like he'd grown up shouting at cattle and forgot how to talk to people. Ain't this a picture? The big girl and the redskins set tin up house. No one laughed, not even his own men. Wakasa didn't answer. The man clicked his tongue and looked at Millie. I remember you, girl. You didn't even blink when we told that joke about the ox. Got some grit. But you don't belong out here. She does now, Wakasa said. That got their attention. The man's smile faded. You got a funny way of understanding belonging. Wakasa tilted his head slightly. So do you. The man with the whip leaned forward in his saddle. You're sitting Elk's pup, huh? Thought that bloodline died out with the winter culls. It didn't. The man in front glanced back at his group. See, I told y'all. This ain't just about the girl. This is about pride. About lines not meant to cross. Millie's stomach turned. She took a half step forward. You had your chance, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. You made your jokes. You passed me over. Now I'm standing here as someone's wife, and you can't stand it. That stunned them for a second. You shut your... One started, but the leader raised a hand. No. Let her speak. She did. I was nothing to you. Too big to marry, too rough to want. You traded me like meat. But now that someone saw something else, you want to come with torches and rage. The man smiled again, colder this time. You don't get it, girl. It ain't about you. It's about order. About what happens if everyone just takes what they want and calls it marriage. Wakasa stepped forward once. No, he said softly. It's about fear. A pause. You're afraid of what happens when someone not like you loves what you threw away. The words hung there, quiet, sharp. Then the man with the whip pulled it loose, snapping it once in the air. You got till the count of 10 to pack up and get out. You don't leave, we'll burn this place down with you in it. Wakasa looked over at Millie. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She stepped beside him, not behind. Closer now, touching shoulders. Then she said the thing that caught even her off guard. We don't run. That made something shift behind the writer's eyes. Defiance wasn't part of the script. Especially not from her. Especially not after all the years they'd taught her silence. The whipman raised his hand. The fire cracked. And then, from the hills behind the grove, another sound. Hoofbeats. Dozens. No lanterns. No shouting. Just the rhythmic thunder of horses. Calm and measured. The 5 riders turned their heads. From the darkness came riders dressed in buffalo hides and bone jewelry, faces painted not for war, but for witness. Lakota warriors, mounted and silent, not charging, not threatening, just there, watching. 20? 30? More? Hard to tell. The leader cursed under his breath. Wakasa's voice came calm and low. You came with fire and threats. I came with family. The men shifted in their saddles. No one reached for a gun. Not yet. Then Millie spoke again. Her voice quieter now. You can go back and tell them what you saw here. That a woman no one wanted stood her ground. That a man you feared didn't raise a hand. That you left alive because we let you. The lead rider looked around. Swallowed. Let's ride, he muttered. And they turned. 5 silhouettes shrinking into the night, swallowed by the dark. When they were gone, Wakasa gave a single nod toward the hill. The mounted Lakota disappeared like smoke. Millie let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Wakasa sat back down by the fire. After a moment, she joined him. He didn't say anything. But he didn't have to. They stayed like that for hours. No words, no movement. Just the fire between them, and the truth laid bare beneath the stars. You said, next. ChatGPT said. It was hours past midnight when Millie finally spoke again. I wasn't scared, she whispered. Wakasa didn't look up from the fire, but the faint lift in his brow said he'd heard. I thought I would be. When they came, I thought I'd freeze, shake, maybe even cry. She stared into the flames, voice slow and uncertain, like a wagon while catching on old ruts. But I didn't. Wakasa stirred the fire with a charred stick. Sparks drifted into the sky. You have been afraid for a long time, he said. Tonight, it passed through you. That is what courage feels like. She breathed in deep, as if testing whether she still remembered how to fill her lungs. I didn't know I could do that, she said. You can. She looked at him. Why me? He didn't answer right away, didn't flinch or shift. Just let the fire crackle a bit longer between them. When I saw you, he said, you were the only one not pretending. Pretending what? That you were something smaller than you are. That silenced her. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true in a way no one had ever dared say. For a long time, they didn't speak again. And then he reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in old linen, worn but carefully folded. He set it on the ground between them. She watched as he unwrapped it. A carved piece of antler, maybe the length of her hand, etched with old symbols she couldn't read. "What is it?" she asked. "Wedding gift," he said simply. "For me." He nodded. She hesitated before picking it up. The antler was smooth, warm from the firelight. The carvings were delicate, flowing like wind-carved rock. In the center, a faint shape emerged. Two figures, side by side, not facing each other, but standing shoulder to shoulder. "What does it mean?" she asked. "Balance," he said. "When two walk beside each other, not in front or behind." She looked at it for a long time. "I've never been beside anyone," she murmured. "Always behind. Or under." She traced the lines with her thumb. The symbol felt ancient, but it also felt like her. When she looked up again, he was watching her. Not in a way that asked anything. Not even comfort. Just recognition. The way someone might watch fire warm the frost off a window pane. He said nothing more that night. The next morning, Millie woke to the smell of fresh sage and meat roasting. Wakasa had caught something small, rabbit or grouse, already skinned and sizzling on a hot stone. He didn't say how early he'd risen. She didn't ask. They ate in silence, but not the kind that weighs on the chest. It was the silence of people with something unspoken between them that didn't need to be forced out yet. Later, he showed her how to clean the knife, how to sharpen it without grinding it to a wedge, how to read the tracks near the stream, which ones belong to foxes, which ones to deer. "I don't want to just follow you," she said, setting the blade down. He looked at her. "I want to walk with you, learn, do what you do. Hunt, track, stay quiet. I want to pull my weight." He nodded once. "Then you will." By midday, they were moving again. Further west, where the land rose into low hills and the soil was rich with prairie mint and wild garlic. There were no wagons, no plan, just the horizon, and a quiet sense that they were meant to meet whatever came next together. They reached a small rise overlooking a distant valley. Smoke curled gently from a Lakota village miles off, hides stretched taut over wooden frames, children darting between cook fires. No one waved, no one approached, but Wakasa stopped and stood still. "They know we're here," he said. "Will they come?" she asked. In time, they made camp on the hill, sheltered by tall grass and wind. Millie built the fire this time, slowly but cleanly. No smoke, no ash blown loose. Wakasa watched but didn't instruct. That night, as the stars bled into view, she leaned against him. Not for warmth, not for comfort, but for the simple act of saying, "I'm here. You're here. And that matters." She held the carved antler in her lap like a promise. "I used to think no man would ever want me," she said. Wakasa didn't speak. "I thought I had to be smaller, talk softer, eat less, move less, take up less space." She ran her thumb over the carving again. "But you never asked me to do any of that." Still, he didn't speak. So she looked at him directly and asked, "Why not?" This time he did answer. "Because everything in the world already tries to make you small." She swallowed hard. "I would rather walk beside something strong," he said, "than carry something broken." Millie closed her eyes for a moment. Let the wind move through her. When she opened them again, tears lined her lashes, but she wasn't ashamed. Not of her size, not of her scars, not of the calluses on her palms or the way her dress fit tight across her shoulders. That night, she slept without dreams. And when the sun rose, she didn't feel like she had been rescued. She felt chosen. She was not something traded. She was someone claimed. And this time, the word bride didn't feel like a collar. Felt like a path. The valley below had changed. By midweek, riders came from the Lakota village. 2 women first, both older, their braids silvered with time. They didn't approach with curiosity or skepticism. They brought dried berries, smoked fish, and a clean blanket. One of them handed Millie a piece of buffalo sinew already coiled for mending. No words, just gestures of respect. Millie sat with them, learning how to stitch hide the right way, not with speed, but with care. Her stitches were clumsy at first, hands too big for such fine work. But the women didn't correct her harshly. They smiled with their eyes, showed her again. Slower. Surer. Millie listened. Later, when they left, Wakasa stood beside her and said, "You've been accepted." She turned toward him. "Already? It doesn't take long to see someone's heart." She looked down at her hands, still marked with soot, dirt under the nails, knuckles scarred from years of labor. No rings, no ribbon. But the women hadn't looked at her like she needed softening. They had looked at her like she was enough. A few days passed with no signs of the riders from the auction. The threat felt like a shadow that had moved on. Millie helped gather wood, trap rabbits, stretch sinew, salt hides. She spoke little but listened constantly. Every evening, Wakasa taught her something else, not with lectures but by doing. She followed him on narrow trails where the wind whispered through stone, and he showed her where deer slept by the warmth of boulders, how water moved beneath cracked soil even when it hadn't rained in weeks. One night, she asked him a question that had lingered too long in her chest. "Would your people have approved?" Wakasa looked up from the fire. "Of you?" She nodded. He turned toward her fully. "They didn't choose you. I did." She wanted to press further, but stopped, because for once the answer felt like enough. But later that night, as they watched the stars rise in silence, he added, "My mother would have liked you. She didn't smile often, but she would have for you." Millie's throat tightened. "Why?" "Because you don't hide." "I used to," she said. "All the time. You stopped. I didn't know how much I'd been hiding until you looked at me like I wasn't strange." "You are strange," he said softly. And he added, "But so am I." They both laughed, quiet and low. It was the first time she had laughed without flinching. At dusk the next day, someone else came. A girl, no older than 13, stepping shyly between the cottonwoods, bare feet silent in the grass. She had a woven pouch slung over her shoulder and held it to her chest as if guarding treasure. Wakasa rose but didn't approach. Millie stood behind him. The girl looked up and spoke in Lakota. Wakasa's face shifted, not alarmed, but deeply still. He nodded once. The girl walked forward and held out the pouch. Millie took it, hands unsure. Inside was a strip of soft deerskin, painted with bright ochre lines and symbols. It wasn't a map. It was a name. "She has given you a name," Wakasa said. Millie looked down, lips parting. "What does it mean?" "Stands like earth." Millie blinked. "She says you do not shift when others try to move you, that you don't shout or tremble, but hold steady." Millie ran her fingers across the painted hide. "Is that good?" "It is rare." The girl smiled, bowed slightly, and turned to leave. She disappeared as quickly as she had come. Millie sat down slowly, the pouch clutched to her chest. "No one's ever given me a name before," she whispered. "You had one," Wakasa said. "They just called you by smaller ones." Weeks passed, but the world beyond the valley didn't forget. Sheriff Langford returned, alone again, this time with a satchel of letters and a folded newspaper. "Thought you should know," he said, dismounting. The auction house was shut down. Officially. Millie raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Too much noise." Word got around that a Lakota man walked off with a girl they mocked, and no one stopped him. Some folks felt ashamed. Some felt threatened. Either way, the place got boarded up before the wrong people asked the wrong questions. Millie didn't quite smile. Langford pulled a tin from his pocket, shook a few coins loose. "Also," he added, "someone left this for you. Said it was back pay for services unfulfilled." He tilted the tin toward her. "You were traded like goods. Now they're trying to balance their conscience." Millie didn't move. Wakasa stepped forward and took the tin. He handed it back to the sheriff. "Give it to the girl who brings food to the elder with no teeth," he said. Langford blinked, then nodded. Before he left, he looked at Millie one last time. "You look different." "I am. Doesn't happen easy." "No," she said. "It doesn't." He tipped his hat and rode away. As his silhouette faded, Wakasa looked at her and asked, "Do you miss anything?" She shook her head. Just pieces of myself I didn't know were missing. They watched the valley turn orange under the falling sun. That night they sat with no fire, just the hush of crickets, the soft rustle of grass. She laid the name strip over her lap and whispered it to herself, again and again, not because she needed to remember it, but because it finally fit. Stands like Earth, the girl no one wanted, the bride no one saw coming, and the woman who now walked beside a man who never once asked her to shrink.